So today we're going to continue our exploration of the Six Paramitas. And today we'll get into Virya, which means effort. And this word effort shows up a number of times in the Buddhist teachings and in the Abhidharma and the various discourses of the Buddha. It comes up as right effort in the Noble Eightfold Path. And Virya, effort, it's often translated as effort in the Six Paramitas. And then there are also the four supreme efforts. And then this word shows up in a variety of different places. So I just want to explore this a little bit. So in right effort, I just want to read here what the Buddha says. And what, monks, is right effort? Here, monks, a monk generates desire for the non-arising of unarisen evil wholesome states. He makes an effort, arouses energy, applies his mind, and strives. He generates desire for the abandoning of arisen evil unwholesome states. And then there's a lot of repetition here of some of the things that he says. But basically, and then you'll see this again in the four supreme efforts. But he talks about effort toward unarisen, unwholesome states, effort towards arisen, unwholesome states, effort towards wholesome states that are not yet arisen, and then effort towards wholesome states that are arisen. So I know that sounds really confusing, so I just want to unpack that a little bit. But then before I get into that, I just want to read the final statement that he says after he talks about those four supreme states. He generates desire for the continuation of arisen wholesome states, for their non-decline, increase, expansion, and fulfillment by development. He makes an effort, arouses energy, applies his mind, and strives. This is called right effort. So, unarisen unwholesome states are, if we can foresee into our future. For example, if we know we're going to be visiting our family, and if we have issues with our family, we can predict that if certain subjects arise, or if we act in a certain way with our family, that certain unwholesome mental states will arise. I was just talking about this with a client yesterday. So how do you go, because she's this person that I know is moving home for a while, and how do you set yourself up well to live with a family that you don't necessarily get along with that well? How do you do that ahead of time? So what subjects do you avoid? How do you become like water instead of a mountain? How do you flow with what's happening versus trying to stand up for who you are and push your individuation, your individualization from your family? This could be the same with a supervisor at work, a neighbor, anyone. So that's unarisen, unwholesome states. And then there's the unwholesome states that have arisen. So the inner critic, for example, that voice inside our mind that is telling us that we're not good enough, that we should do better, and all of these kinds of internal things. And that's sort of the cognitive aspect. But then there's also unwholesome states where we just don't feel at ease inside. So for example, here's an example of the sort of the more physical state. So I know that if I drink a lot of caffeine or any caffeine, immediately I'll feel great. And then a couple hours later, or maybe later into the day, I won't feel great. So I avoid that unarisen, unwholesome state by not drinking caffeine. And then if I happen to This actually did happen recently where I was given tea and I didn't know there was caffeine in it. They just said, oh, here's, and I think they thought it was herbal tea or something. It didn't have caffeine, but it was black tea or green tea or something. They didn't realize that that was still a stimulant. So then I was left with this feeling, okay, so now how do I deal with this arisen, unwholesome state that's inside my mind? Okay. So then I put effort towards that, and I use my practice to sit with those feelings and be with it, and versus trying to avoid it. So, and then there's the unarisen, wholesome states. So what might that be? What would that look like? What would that feel like? So obviously a feeling of feeling settled in our bodies, our minds feeling at peace and relaxed, not feeling anxious about something. So how do I put effort towards unarisen, wholesome states? So I might plan to meditate tonight. I might plan to eat healthy food that doesn't stimulate my body and my mind in uncomfortable ways. I might choose to read tonight instead of go to a social gathering, which I know will stir me up and keep me from sleeping well. And then the final one is how do we put effort towards arisen wholesome states? So an arisen wholesome state is, for example, at the end of a weekend retreat or a week-long retreat, or even at the end of today's Zazen and this morning's program, we might have developed a little bit of samadhi. So how do I maintain that? So sometimes I remember there were times where I would drive away from when I lived at Yokoji's in Mountain Center. I would be there all week and it would be very peaceful, and I would have developed this nice sort of internal peace. And then it was party time as soon as I drove off the site, and it was like blasting Tool, putting a loud music on. It was fun time. And boy, that samadhi it was kind of like I was like, I was like floating on the high of the samadhi from the week, but it was a really quick way to just burn that out really fast versus helping sustain that samadhi by maintaining my meditation while I drive, which I like to do. I really like to meditate while I drive. So that's an example of what was it the Buddha said here? Continuation of arisen wholesome states for their non-decline, increase, expansion, and fulfillment by development. Okay, so that's let's see if I want to read anything out of the Abhidharma here. Yeah, here's some more places where effort comes up. So the four supreme efforts is basically what I just said: the effort to discard evil states that have arisen, the effort to prevent the arising of unarisen wholesome states, evil states. So this is obviously some translation from probably a while ago, using words like evil. The effort to develop unarisen wholesome states, the effort to augment arisen wholesome states. And let's see, the four means to accomplishment. There are four means to accomplishment: desire, energy, consciousness, investigation. So here we see the word energy arise, which is actually another way that Virya can be translated. So bringing energy to our practice. And interesting, desire is there as well. Right. So often we hear this. I don't know how you all relate to this, but when I first started learning about Buddhism, desire was evil. It was this bad word. It was not okay. It was the source of all suffering. And And that's just a misunderstanding of this word desire. So we have to have desire for awakening. We have to have desire for the end of our suffering to actually find the end of our suffering. You have to have, desire, energy, consciousness, and investigation. And this word investigation comes up in the Abhidharma here as part of this actual. It's not separate from it's not separate from effort. It's part of the effort. And so it's not just, we often hear that Hakuin was upset with what was happening in the world of Zen at the time. So this was the late 1600s, 17th century, and he was upset with what was happening at the time, and basically called a lot of the Zen people as bumps on a log, just sitting there in a dumb state, in just a blanked out state of mind, which there, from my experience, there's a time and a place for that. And I think that's even talked about in the jhanas of, reaching these places of kind of equanimity and spaciousness. But then also, I don't know if you remember from Tetsudo Sensei's talk during Sesshin this past last week, he also talked about the importance of an investigation, of really looking at what is happening. What is this? Who am I? And these are some of the greatest koans. There's all these hundreds of koans, but actually some of the most universal koans through Zen, through Buddhism, and into Hinduism, into, I think, probably all spiritualities, is who am I? What is this? Who am I? Really looking into that. So then the Buddha also taught the 7 factors of enlightenment: mindfulness, investigation of states, energy, zest, tranquility, concentration, equanimity. He says the 3 factors of investigation, energy, and zest are opposed to mental sluggishness. So again, that's pointing to that not being a bump on a log, but really being awake when we meditate, and being awake in our lives. And here are the words investigation, energy, and zest. So now this word zest comes into the picture. So that's some of the stuff from the Buddhist teachings. Now I want to get into some other things. So Aiken Roshi sent this out, or we sent this out in the newsletter this week, and Shishin Roshi used this definition from Aiken Roshi of Virya: the advancement of single-minded spiritual vigor. So here we have the word vigor, spiritual vigor, single-minded, and the advancement of. So that, coming back to that 4th supreme effort, advancing, augmenting. So a topic I'd like to get into right now is this connection between intention and effort. So as a therapist, when I work with folks and they say, oh, I really want this in my life, but I'm lazy. And I want this in my life, but I'm lazy. I say, well, what do you do with your time? What are you actually doing? And they're doing all this other stuff. They're just not doing the things that they're saying they want to do. But clearly some part of them wants to do these other things. And clearly they have plenty of effort to do these other things, such as playing video games. Oh, I want to work out more. I want to get a job. I want to further my career. Well, what are you doing with your time? Well, I play video games 7 hours a day, and I eat a lot, and I sleep a lot. Well, clearly there's a lot of effort going towards those things. That must be something that some part of you really likes doing, and you get something out of that, or else you wouldn't be doing it. So where that comes up for us, for me, in our practice is taking a step back and looking at our priorities that we're engaged and committed to in our lives? Where in our priorities does Zen practice fit? And where do we want it to fit? So if we want to experience deep realization, we probably need to have that as priority number one. Zen probably needs to be priority number one. But if our aspiration for Zen practice simply involves just feeling a little better each day, managing our stress from the day, setting ourselves up for the morning to go to work and do our life with a calm mind, then it might not have to be priority number one. And maybe our priority number one is our career. Maybe it's our family. Maybe it's our partner. Maybe it's our physical health and fitness. Maybe it's how we look. Maybe it's friends, social connections. Maybe it's social justice, environmental justice. There's so many things that can be that top one or top two or top three priorities. And I think for me, it's been important many times in my life to take a step back and reevaluate or evaluate or just kind of check in like, okay, what actually are my priorities? I think this was pretty clear a couple of years ago. Getting my priorities straight, put certain things in motion. And now that motion has been going for a while, but now that motion has sort of evolved and changed in different ways. And now I need to stop, pull out my journal, and write down. This is the way I usually do it. I write down all the things that I spend time doing in my life. And then I kind of write down in order how much time I spend doing those things. So that really shows my priorities, actually. Then I write a second list of what do I want them to be? What do I want those priorities to be? And we'll get into this want thing in a minute here too, because this is pretty important. Now, as you know, most of our practitioners with the Great Mountain Zen Center are lay practitioners. And even though I'm an ordained priest, I very much live a lay lifestyle. There's a commitment underneath my skin that has to do with the ordination for, being here at the Abbey, serving my teachers, serving the Sangha. The ordination is a vow of service. But if you look at my life, largely I live what looks like a lay lifestyle. And ultimately, from the teachings I've received and from my own experience, we're trying to take Zen practice into all of our activities of life. So if Zen practice and our interest in realization or deepening our understanding, deepening that feeling of peace inside our bodies and minds is actually priority number one, it can still be friends with all of the other commitments and priorities we have in our life. We just have to be very clear about our intention for that. If we're not clear about our intention for that, then underlying deep in our psyche, there isn't this aspiration, this intention, this zest, this zeal to bring practice into everything we do. Driving, relationships, work, eating, cleaning, using the bathroom, showering, walking around our house, going out to pick up the mail, watching movies. If our interests, our deep psychic intentions, our subconscious intentions will drive what kind of movies we're drawn to, what kind of people we want to hang out with or who we want to hang out with, what I expose myself to when I listen to the news or watch TV or read things online. So making this connection between intention, remember in the Eightfold Path, we have right intention. So right intention and right effort, or right can be an odd word. You could say life affirming. Astor and I had a discussion about these words the other day. So life affirming or practice affirming, realization affirming intention, realization affirming effort. Because we can have right effort towards all kinds of things in our lives. So I'm sure many of you had this experience where we go through seasons with all of our commitments in our lives. So whether it's practice or work or relationships, one season is we're really excited about whatever we're into, practice, a relationship, our job, working out. And then our motivation and energy sort of falls off and we find ourselves interested in something else. But we still have to do this other thing. We still have to show up to our job. We still have to show up to our relationship. Meanwhile, that zeal that's underneath has faded a little bit. And we know that because when we start to feel resistance to showing up to those things, okay, got to get up and meditate again. Okay, I guess I'll go to Saturday program today. It's Monday, got to go to work again. Those are clear signs that something about our intention and our zeal for whatever that commitment is that we made in our life has faded, and something else may be taking over. So those are opportunities to step back when we hear those words coming out of our mouths or those words going through our minds, to step back and reorient, commit to these things, or take them out of our life. Maybe we don't have the need for them in our life anymore, and to simplify and cut things out that don't need to be there. So this connection between intention and effort, commitment and effort. Now, here's some interesting things. When I was looking into this experience of effort, I've noticed this before, and I want to run some things by you all. So I'm going to say a few lines, and I want to see how this fits, how this feels. So I'm going to say the line and just see how it feels in your body, in your mind. I should sit more. I need to sit more. I want to sit more. I have to sit more. Can you feel the difference in those? For me, each one of those has a really different feel to them. And in my therapy practice, I often bring this up with clients a lot, because they say, I need to work out more. And then I'll ask them, do you want to work out more? Or is this just knowing that you need something? Or is this a should that you're putting on yourself? And the reason I ask these questions is because what I see is that people often make these statements for themselves, but then they have a really difficult time following through. And the follow through is often related to where that is coming from inside themselves. Is it a should, or is it a I want to? Now, I'm not saying the should isn't useful. I think the should can be useful, but we have to investigate where that should is coming from. Our inner critic, this voice that says, you need to do this, or you're not good enough, or, you should be doing this. A lot of our shoulds and need tos can be coming from this inner voice that is related to our deep sense of insecurity and a feeling of not being good enough, a feeling of not feeling okay, not being okay, not just not feeling okay, but not being okay. And so if our zest for something is coming from that can turn into overcompensation. So our effort towards athleticism, for example, can become neurotic because underlying our effort towards working out can be this deep self-hatred and this deep hatred of how I look, how I feel. I'm not thin enough. I'm not strong. I'm not muscular enough, whatever. And we can actually get injured from that in the working out. We can exhaust ourselves and ultimately become just a general unhealthy practice, an unhealthy experience. So the same can be true in meditation, I think, in practice, in Zen practice. Now, the great thing about Zen practice, I said this during my talk in retreat, is that I have personally found that any ego I bring to Zen practice ultimately works itself out. If I'm willing to investigate, if I'm willing to look and investigate, and if I keep showing up to practice, the more I sit, the deeper my sort of, waking up process goes, the more that underlying agenda dissolves away. And so I'm thankful for whatever ego process have brought me to practice, but it can also be unhealthy. So for example, I'm sure many of you out there don't have to deal with this, but I had to deal with this. And I'm still a young practitioner, at 47 years old, still a young, a middle-aged person. But I was practicing in my 20s. And in my 20s, boy, I had so many dreams of being famous and being somebody and being appreciated, recognized, all those words that go along with being up on stage or, having some type of, and so I was trying to be a famous rock climber, and ultimately it got me injured. Ultimately, I injured myself because I wasn't taking enough time off, because I had this voice inside that was saying, no, you got to keep going. You got to do more. You got to do it now. You don't have, you're getting too old. 26 as a professional rock climber is actually a little old. And so if you haven't reached a certain thing by 26-year-old, your career might not go very far. So, and that's true with a lot of athletics, like ice skaters and gymnasts and all these things. Now our gymnasts are like 17 years old or 16 years old kind of thing. So, so I had all these stories going on inside that actually led me to have injuries that made me stop being able to climb anyway. But as soon as I stopped climbing, a lot of that stuff transferred into my Buddhist practice. I want to be enlightened. I want to be the most enlightened. I want to be like Hakuin. I want to be like Dogen. And I have seen myself over the years do things like that, where I have this story of like, my practice is not good enough. I need to do more. My forms in the Zendo aren't good enough. I'm not ironing my robes enough. Actually, I had that thought this morning, which is probably true. But anyway, all of that can come into practice too. And so we can have all these internal self stories that are driving our practice that aren't actually coming from this deep desire to end suffering. Well, they might be related, but ultimately it can actually be an intention to create a self and create an ego versus dissolve one. So that's called spiritual materialism. Spiritual materialism is where we're trying to create a self, create an ego out of spiritual practices rather than dissolve one. And so anytime we find ourselves feeling a little tight around the Dharma, it should be like this, it's supposed to be like this, or I should be doing this, or I should be doing that. That word should is a real yellow flag, a real kind of caution light for some type of ego process going on. I'll say usually, whenever we say nevers and always, it's often not completely correct. So I'm just shedding some light on the internal psychological stuff that can be related to our effort and our zeal and our desire to practice. So the seasons thing, I just want to validate our humanity here. We do go through seasons of practice. There are times where we feel really excited about practice and we just can't get enough sitting, and we want to lose sleep to stay up late and sit, and we want to spend our weekends sitting more, and we want to do lots of retreats, and we want to visit Zen centers, and we want to do koans, and we just can't get enough of it. And that's definitely my experience. And then there's other times where summer comes here in Colorado, and I just want to get outside. I've been cooped up all winter. It's dark at 4:30 in the evening. It's cold, and summer's here. And boy, I just want to go rock climbing, and I want to get out and be out in nature. I want to hear the birds chirp. I want to see the green, the fresh green grass, the little, those little like lime green tips to the pine trees that bud in the spring and the summer here. The wildflowers, it's just so beautiful. And I really enjoy this incarnation here on this planet. And so my practice might fade a little bit in terms of how much I'm sitting during that period of time. And then I start to feel a little off internally by the end of summer or something. And then that offness that I feel starts to reinvigorate my desire for practice. And then I start sitting more, my commitments shift, my priorities shift again. And I check in with myself, and suddenly I'm 15 minutes early to the meditation instead of right on time, or half an hour early instead of right on time. And I think this is really healthy. In the Korean Zen, they have 2 ongos a year and then 2 off seasons. So it goes in 3-month sections. And the 2 ongos, they go big. So it's 3 months on, 3 months off, 3 months on, 3 months off. And during those 3 months on, they go big, sleeping 3 hours a night sometimes, or not at all, and staying in the meditation position all night, through meditation retreats. And then in those 3 months off, they're allowed to travel. They can go from monastery to monastery and go visit family and, go do personal retreats if that's what they want to do. And so there's this space to relax from the structure, relax from the tight holding of the personal structure and the external structure. And then over time, that rejuvenates that desire to come back for the next 3-month period and go big again. And we see athletes do this. We see people do this at work. In academic settings, people take sabbaticals. School teachers get the summers off. There's off seasons for basketball and, football and other professional athletes. And that's a time to sort of take a breath. And it's also a time to integrate what we learned, what we've awakened to, and spread that awakening out horizontally into all the different aspects of our lives, and wear ourselves out a little bit, and then bring it back in for that next season. Come back in, go deep again. All right, so I'll finish up here, maybe another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for discussion. In terms of effort, there's one thing I just want to make clear from my experience, from what I've learned from my teachers, from what I've read from current Dharma teachers, other Dharma teachers, what I've heard in talks, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. If your intention is to wake up, like to actually have a deep realization of no self, of impermanence, of true nature, it's going to have to be priority number 1 for most people. There's always exceptions to the rule. Some people have spontaneous awakening experiences, but for the rest of us, and I'm definitely in that category, it's got to become number 1 for us at some point, and for a period of time, not for a week, not for a month, but a good chunk of time in our lives. It's going to have to become number 1 if we want to have that deep realization. And that means we'll have to look at all the other things that are getting in the way of us getting to the cushion. And that time on the cushion or laying, however you meditate, however you find that stillness. I really like laying down meditation, to be honest. When I go to bed every night, I lay there and meditate to go to sleep. I really focus on my practice and feel my body and just breathe into my body and just feel as I go to sleep every night. So anyway, laying down meditation, walking meditation, choosing not to listen to music while we drive and actually meditate while we drive, choosing not to watch TV while we eat and actually meditate while we eat. It's that kind of effort, that kind of zeal that for most of us is required for a deep realization. And again, I'll step back from, and let me just say, so lots and lots of meditation, lots of letting go of unnecessary things in our lives, consistent effort over time, and that single-minded spiritual vigor. And also, that's not everybody's path in this life, and I want to validate that too. There's nothing wrong with anybody for not having that as their intention in this life. Everything is perfect as it is. When you see reality as it is, you realize there's nothing wrong. Even all the suffering that's happening in the world, because from that place, it's not suffering. Suffering is just an idea. It's just a concept. Squirrels are putting nuts away for the winter. Kato kills a baby rabbit yesterday. A family member passes away. People die from COVID. The sun rises or the earth turns. Everything is as it is. So you, me, all of us are fine as we are. And it's the degree to which we experience suffering and our karmic unfolding in this life, the karmic seeds that have been planted before this life and in this life that come to fruition in this life. That's what's going to drive us to either want deep realization and also find the effort to follow that want, that desire, or bring us to practice simply just to calm our minds and to find a little peace. They're both fine. There's no problem. So we don't need to beat ourselves up if we don't have that strong, deep desire to wake up. But if we do have that, that's a seed that we want to cultivate. And we have to be careful in our lives because there's so many things that can get in the way of that seed getting watered daily in the way that it needs it to actually bloom. All right, so, and that's the compassion piece. That's the compassion and loving kindness for ourselves that I'm bringing up here. It's important that we're okay with whatever our aspirations are, whatever degree or level of our aspiration, because they're all okay. So I'll finish with this quote. And this was from Roshi's words that we shared in the newsletter this week. The Buddha says, if you students exert meticulous effort, nothing will be difficult to accomplish. Therefore, you should make an effort to practice carefully, for when water flows constantly against a big rock, the ego, even a small amount of water will eventually dig out a large hole. But if one who practices becomes lax, it will be impossible to accomplish anything. It is like trying to start a fire by rubbing two sticks together. If you stop rubbing before the wood gets hot, you can't start a fire. This is what is meant by meticulous effort. Thank you all for listening.